All right, Romans 14 and verse 20. Says, question 12, do not destroy the what? The work of God for the sake of food. All things indeed are pure, but it is evil if it is eaten with offense. Now, this statement again speaks two things, or a number of things. Do not destroy the work of God for the sake of food. The phrase work of God is a euphemism for your brother in Christ. That's because that's what's under consideration here, our relationship with our brothers and sisters in Christ. And so, do not destroy the work of God. By the way, this phrase is also found earlier. But when it says, do not destroy the work of God for the sake of food, he's talking about the soul, the faith of your weaker brother. And then for the sake of food, all things indeed are pure. This goes back to what we discussed last week, where in Mark 7, Jesus purified all foods. Specifically in that text, it's not what goes into a man's mouth that defiles him, but what comes out, because what goes in is passed through the stomach and out into the draught, but what comes out originates in the heart, and that's what defiles a man. And then you have the incident with Peter in Acts 10, where the vision of the unclean, the Bible does not call them unclean. The Bible just says all sorts of four-footed creatures. Arise, Peter, kill and eat. Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is unclean. Of course, the response is, what God has cleansed, you do not call unclean. We made a note. God was not trying to get Peter to violate his conscience. He was trying to get Peter to understand that all men are equal in the eyes of God. But there is a principle involved here that after probably 7, 8, 10 years, Peter had still never eaten anything outside of the Jewish dietary restrictions. And moreover, he would have considered it a sin to have done it. Again, look at the response. Not so, Lord. Arise, Peter, kill and eat. Not so, Lord. I've never eaten anything unclean. So even Peter still considered that food as being unclean, even though Jesus had cleansed all food. And so we learned a couple things in regard to that matter. It was clean food, but it would have been a sin for Peter to have eaten it, at least at that time. And by the way, we don't know if he ever got over it. We do know that he went in and ate with Gentiles at one time in Galatians chapter 2, and also with the household of Cornelius. He ate there. I don't know what they served him, but the point is, at that time in Peter's life, 10 years after he'd obeyed the gospel, he still thought it'd be a sin for him to eat that. All right, and then he says, but it is evil if eaten with offense. Now, the word offense there means to eat without a clear conscience. Sometimes we think about the word offended and we think about it in the common use of the term, but that's not. This is talking about what causes the pangs of conscience. And so that is what is regarding offense. And then this, of course, we've already talked about the first paragraph. So the second paragraph, all things indeed are pure. Pure means to be undefiled, lawful to be eaten or used, not forbidden, free from sin or guilt, void of evil, innocent, or possessing moral purity. And then here are some other renderings of this text. The ESV says, everything indeed is clean. All food is clean, the NIV says. Home and Christian, everything is clean. Paul said as much in 1 Timothy chapter 4. He said, everything is pure and nothing is to be refused if it is received with thanksgiving, for it is sanctified by the word of God and prayer. And so Paul affirmed to Timothy that all, but that was in the context of certain people forbidding to marry and commanding to abstain from meat. All right, and so, but Paul makes a very straightforward statement in regard to all these things are pure. Everything is clean. There's no offense. All right, verse 21. It is good neither to what? Eat meat, nor drink wine, nor do anything by which your brother what? Stumbles or is offended or is made weak. Now, we're going to look at this verse, and if you look through your lesson, there are a ton of notes connected to this, because there's a lot that needs to be said. There's a lot of, for lack of a better term, there's a lot of nuance that needs to be fleshed out in this particular discussion. All right, so again, let me go to the end of it first, the end of the verse first. Stumble, offended, made weak, all have to do with causing a brother to violate his own conscience. All three of those things are just it's almost like it's like a Hebrew parallelism. It's to say the same thing repeatedly for emphasis. Stumble, offended, made weak. All essentially talking about the same thing. A brother will do something that violates his conscience, and so we want to be clear on that. Now, consider the inclusion of nor drink wine in this text. All right. The entirety of Romans 14 and the first 7 verses of chapter 15 concern the matters of conscience or scruple, and not things which are inherently sinful. Everything we've talked about for the last 4 or 5 weeks, as when we started this chapter, we've emphasized these are things that are permissible, but not if they violate one's conscience, or not if they cause another brother to violate his conscience. All right, and Paul includes the phrase drink wine. He uses the word there is oinos. It's the word for wine. It's the only word for wine. And every use of it in the New Testament is a reference to wine. But again, there's more to be said on that. But from the outset, second paragraph, I'm just going to read it, and I got one note I got to add that I didn't get in the note. Before proceeding with an examination of the meaning and use of wine in the biblical text and its use in this specific context, I want to make clear my personal convictions on the casual use of alcohol. All right, now when I say the casual use of alcohol, I mean anything that is either non-medicinal or social drinking. Okay, that's the idea of that's what I mean by casual use of alcohol. The casual use is a non-medicinal or social use of alcohol. All right, I do not drink. I do not believe it is permissible for me to drink. By my conscience, I do not believe it is permissible to drink. I believe all people, and especially Christians, should abstain from the casual use of alcohol. That's my belief. I think the whole world would be better off if nobody drank. That's my position. But I believe that Christians especially should abstain from the casual use of alcohol. I encourage people not to drink in any casual context, as the abuse of alcohol is one of our nation's greatest scourges and has caused much sorrow and heartache. And I can speak from experience on this matter, having grown up in a household with a father who was an alcoholic. And alcohol destroyed essentially everything about that man's life. Destroyed his marriage. It destroyed essentially probably every job that he ever had. I mean, my dad was by the words of his own boss, the finest engineer the man had ever seen. When my dad died in 96, I just moved here in February. My dad died in October. Miss Bulin, B.A., came up to Dexter and went to my dad's funeral. Wade and Ann came up, I remember, went to my dad's funeral. But my dad's bosses, both of them from Toronto, Canada, came down for my dad's funeral. And Barry Coca said, "Your dad is the finest engineer I've ever worked with in 30 years." Says his ability to see way down the road, issues down the road, he said, is unsurpassed. All right? So my dad was a great engineer. All right? But he couldn't hold a job for more than a few years. I mean, he worked for Chrysler, the big auto plant in St. Louis. But alcohol destroyed his family in that it destroyed his decision making. It destroyed his jobs. It destroyed most relationships that he had. So, you're looking at a person who is anti-alcohol. I mean, I don't know how to make it any clearer than that. All right? My thought processes, I hope, are perfectly clear. Now, bottom of the page. The Greek word here for wine is oinos. Its use in the New Testament is fermented grape juice. The use of wine in this case is often ignored or mentioned with apologetic attempts to undermine or negate the biblical use of the word. In other words, people try to somehow do a workaround on the word and they don't let the Bible say what it says and let the text say what it says. Top of page 7. The Greek language utilized a completely different word to describe freshly pressed grape juice. And that word is trux. It would be pronounced trux. T-R-U-X, long U. All right? There is no Strong's number associated with this word. I put the Strong's number when I give you Greek words. There's no Strong's number associated with this word because it does not appear anywhere in the New Testament. The word trux does not appear anywhere in the New Testament. The argument that oinos can be fermented or unfermented grape juice is rooted in the temperance movement of the 19th century. All right, and so what we're going to talk about going forward is the biblical and the historical and the linguistic evidence that oinos is wine made from grapes, that is, fermented grape juice. Now, just from the outset, nobody ever argued for a two-definition meaning for oinos until the 1800s. In other words, you read all the writings of all the church fathers from the days of the New Testament and everybody for the next 1700 years, and nobody makes that argument for the use of the word oinos. Nobody. The lexicons do not. And by the way, lexicons do not determine meaning. Lexicons simply tell you how a word was used in a particular context. And I've got a list of those. I think, yes, on page 8, and we'll get there eventually. All right? In the Old Testament, the word for wine is yayin. It's what Noah drank and became drunk on. Genesis 9. It's what Lot's daughters gave him to drink to make him drunk in Genesis 19. It is what priests were forbidden to drink when they came to fulfill their duties in the tabernacle. No, there is a forbidding of priests to drink under specific circumstances. And those circumstances are when they come to fulfill their priestly duties. That's Leviticus 10 and verse 9. Yayin is also described as a gift from God that makes the hearts of men glad. Just to I'll read the text to you. Psalm 104. and verse number 15. Actually, go to verse 14 so that the sentence makes sense. He causes the grass to grow for the cattle, and vegetation for the service of man, that he may bring forth food from the earth, and wine that makes glad the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread which strengthens man's heart. In other words, this is the psalmist giving God thanks for all of these things, and Yayin is in that list. Yayin that makes glad the heart of man. All right, now turn back to Deuteronomy 14 and verse number 26. Deuteronomy 14 and verse 26. And the reason I'm talking about the Old Testament word is because it's helpful when we talk about how the New Testament word is used. In Deuteronomy 14 and verse 26, what you have beginning of verse 22 is there's a feast that's going on, and there is a tithe that is supposed to take place. And it's a tithe of everything. Animals, grain, any type of harvest, those types of things. And it says, let me just start in verse 22. You will truly tithe all the increase of your grain that field produces year by year. And you shall eat before the Lord your God in the place where he chooses to make his name abide. The tithe of your grain, your new wine, your oil, the firstborn of your herds and flocks, that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. But if the journey is too long for you and you are not able to carry the tithe, or if the place where the Lord chooses to put his name is too far from you when the Lord your God has blessed you, then you shall exchange it for money. Take the money in your hand and go to the place that the Lord your God chooses. Here's the setup. We're living in Hamilton, and God has set the place for us to meet in Birmingham. Okay? But we can't tote all of our grain and harvest to Birmingham. So what the Lord says to do is take all of your tithe in Hamilton and sell it. Exchange it for money. Then go to Birmingham with your money. And here's verse 26. And you shall spend that money, your tithe money, the Lord's money. You shall spend that money for whatever your heart desires, for oxen or sheep, for wine or similar drink, for whatever your heart desires, and shall eat there before the Lord your God, and shall rejoice, you and your household. Language is clear. The word there is yayin. When you take your tithe money, you may purchase yayin or similar drink. All right. Now, I said all that to say this. Last line. Well, end of the next to last line. In the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, oinos is the counterpart to yayin. In other words, the word for wine that's found in the New Testament is also the word found in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. So when we read yayin, we can think oinos, because that's the replacement word in the translation. All right, third paragraph. In the New Testament, there is no text where the use of oinos refers to non-fermented grape juice. No, not even in the wedding feast at Cana in John 2. In the Lord's wineskins illustration, the expansion of new wine implies fermentation. Now, why do you not put new wine into old wineskins? Because in the fermentation process, it expands. So you have to put new wine in new wineskins. But the point is, Jesus is using an illustration of fermentation in his old wine, new wine, wineskins illustration. He's implying fermentation in this process. All right. let's see, that's Matthew 9:17. Okay, then there's just a few here, just 5 other texts where oinos is used. It's not all of them, but just gives you a cross-reference. The Samaritan poured oil and wine into the wounds of the wounded traveler. On the cross, Jesus was given wine mixed with myrrh to drink. Ephesians 5:18, do not be drunk with wine, wherein is excess. 1 Timothy 3:8, deacons are not to be given too much wine, which, by the way, is the same admonition given to older women in Titus chapter 2. So, that's all of you but Fallon and Lexi and B. Rest of y'all old women. But that's the phrase, do not given too much wine, qualification for deacons. 1 Timothy 5:23, Timothy was to use a little wine for his stomach's sake. The word use is not the word for drink, it's the word for take, like medicine. Take a little wine for your stomach's sake and your oft infirmities. All right, so just kind of giving you a broad spectrum of how the word appears in various contexts. Okay, now look at Luke 1 and verse 15. I want you to see what the Bible says specifically about John the Baptist. In Luke 1:15, this is what the angel said to John's father, Zacharias, about John the Baptist. Verse 15. He will be great in the sight of the Lord, and shall drink neither wine nor strong drink. In other words, this is a characteristic of John that is going to separate him from everybody else. And by the way, the word strong or phrase strong drink does not refer to liquor, like whiskey. There were no distilleries for hundreds of years until after this time. Strong drink means fermented juice of something other than a grape. Any type of fermented drink that doesn't come from a grape. That's the general gist. But John will drink neither wine nor strong drink. In other words, this is a mark of this man. Okay? Now, turn over to Luke 7 and look at verse 33. Here's Jesus talking about John the Baptist and contrasting John with himself. For John the Baptist came neither eating bread nor what? Drinking wine. And you said he has a demon. But the Son of Man has done what? He's come eating and drinking. The Son of Man has come and done both. And you call him a glutton and a wine bibber. A wine bibber. All right? So, note that Jesus makes the statement, John never drank anything with any level of alcohol in it, and contrasted that with himself. With himself. John came neither eating nor drinking wine, and you said he's demon-possessed. The Son of Man has come both eating and drinking, and you call me a glutton and a wine bibber. All right, so Jesus, makes a distinction here between him and John, or between himself and John, that oftentimes goes overlooked. Now, next to the last paragraph from the bottom where it says the common, all right, the common everyday use of low alcohol content wine among the Jews is well known. Most fully fermented wines in Jesus' day were about 8 to 14% alcohol by volume. Even in the Greco-Roman world, drinking undiluted wine was considered barbaric. And there are statements in the Talmud and the Mishnah. These are the Jewish traditional teachings that exist outside of the Old Testament. Okay? the Mishnah and the Talmud indicate that normal dilution of wine was 3 parts water to 1 part wine. So if a cup of wine was we'll just use the number 10% because that's an easier number to divide. All right? So if a cup of wine was 10% alcohol by volume, then diluted 3 to 1 with water, it would be about 2.5% alcohol by volume, which is half of the alcohol volume of your standard beer. Beer is 5% alcohol by volume. And so, according to the Talmud and the Mishnah, the wine that the Jews drank every single day was half of the alcohol content of a can of beer, which is 12 ounces. And then you think about the amount that would have to be consumed. Okay, so one would have to drink more than a quart of diluted wine in order to get the alcohol content of approximately 1 1/2 beer. Nobody drinks a quart of wine. Nobody drinks a quart of wine. Well, look, you know what I mean when I say nobody. I mean, obviously there are people who drink unbelievable amounts of alcohol. But what I'm saying is that people that are consuming wine on a regular basis do not drink 32 ounces of wine. And so that would be, you'd have to drink a quart of that to get 1 1/2 American standard beer. There are beers that are higher in alcohol content, but 5% that's the standard number. And so you have to start considering how much wine would have to be consumed, before a person would ever even begin to, be, for lack of a better term, inebriated. I mean, it's a ton. Okay, it's a ton. It's far more than just 1 glass after supper, for your average Jew. All right, now think about this. One must also consider Peter's response to the Jewish naysayers in Acts 2, who accused the apostles of being full of new wine. Now, the word for wine here is not oinos, but glucose, which refers to a more potent drink than the former. Now note, Peter did not argue against the charge based on a general or strict abstinence from alcohol, but rather the time that the charge was made. Do you see what I'm saying? If somebody accused Peter and the apostles of being drunk, if none of them ever drank any alcohol at all, the argument would be, we don't drink. We don't drink. But what was Peter's argument? It's 9 in the morning. Who are you talking about being, again, obviously we know people today that get up at 9 in the morning and they're hammered. All right? I mean, you see it at the golf course or, fishing tournaments. I mean, but again, most of the time people are not inebriated at 9, at 9 o'clock in the morning. And so, here's an example, that actually happened. I was driving alone from Shelby's house to Jeffrey's a couple years ago. It was 8:30 in the morning. I was trying to navigate traffic, trying to find my turn off because I'd never driven from Shelby's house to Jeffrey's house. So I've got my GPS on my phone. I'm trying to navigate. I'm driving below the speed limit, trying to be careful. And while I'm looking at my phone trying to find the road, my tires come off on the right-hand side and I come back on. Unbeknownst to me, there's a Dixon police officer behind me, so he blue lighted me. I mean, think about it. Here's a guy in the morning driving below the speed limit and can't keep it on the pavement. I pull over and he says, first thing he says, have you been drinking? Now, if I'd have been Peter, I would have said, hey, man, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. But what did I say? First words out of my mouth, no, sir, I don't drink. Because I don't drink. Because if I'd have said, hey, man, it's 9 o'clock in the morning, then I leave open the possibility that I do drink. And so you think about, what was Peter's response? Peter's response is, man, we're good upstanding Jews. We don't drink. No, that wasn't his response. We never consume any alcohol. That's not his response. He says, dude, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. It's way too early for anybody to be intoxicated. And to me, that's the only, like for me, I don't drink is the only acceptable response. Because I don't drink. If you ask me, I've been drinking, I said, no, I don't drink. I don't know any other way to say it and to make it any clearer. All right. So now, is that the first bell? All right. Let me just give this one more paragraph, and then we'll move, Lord willing, next week to. 8, 9, and 10. Anybody else want to claim illness? Take what you need. Anybody else need papers? If you don't have it through page 10, you don't have it. What? All right. The historical usage, just very quickly. The historical usage. Early Christian writers such as Clement of Alexandria, who lived around 150 to 215, the year 150 to 215, and John Chrysostom, circa 947 to 407, those years, understood the word oinos to contain alcohol. They warned against drunkenness, but not against drinking wine itself. Chrysostom famously said, wine is a work of God and drunkenness is a work of the devil. All right. They believed that wine was a good gift from God to be consumed in moderation, and the sin was its abuse. Now, my position is more strict than that. And there's a number of reasons. Number one, those people drank wine many times out of necessity because water sources were not the best. The dilution of wine with water makes the water safer. Another thing is there are a million things at every convenience store that you can drink. Nobody went to the Jerusalem 7-Eleven, and had half the wall covered with things, with Powerade and Mountain Dew, or 15 different kinds of bottled water, or a Coke, or Monster. You see what I'm saying? The choices for what people had during that time. I mean, look, they didn't drink milk like we drink milk for the same reason they had to drink fermented wine. You can't keep milk. If you don't have a refrigerator, your milk is not going to last very long. And so, just for me, from a practical standpoint, again, all of my objections personally aside, there's no need for it. There's no need for it. Like there was a need back then. But it still remains the case that the text says what it says. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. Not that I'm endorsing it in any way, but we can't allow our personal convictions on a matter, or what the brotherhood at large thinks about a matter, determine what the Bible actually teaches. And this is pretty clear. I mean, this matter, in my opinion, is extremely clear. Paul said drinking wine, and he put it in the context of scruple, personal conscience. And so, the text, we have to let the text teach what it teaches, even if it makes us uncomfortable. All right. So, Lord willing, next week we will go to we'll look at the actual use of the words in the Greek text, the lexicons, and then we'll look at some practical ways to show why what we're talking about tonight is legitimate, right? And so let me really, really encourage you to work ahead if you've not already done so. I know 2 of you haven't. Work ahead. Oh, I do. Work on page. Everybody, work on page 9. Work on page 9, at least the top half ahead of next week. All right. And then I should have something to hand out on chapter 15 next Wednesday night. So just, I don't have any extra papers. You have extra papers. I done got Kathy all choked up.